Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. Today's video I wanted to share with you my 4 favorite eBay sellers for buying CGC 9.8 comic books. And I think probably one of the toughest parts of buying CGC 9.8 comic books is finding auctions for those books rather than fixed price auctions. Usually the fixed price ones generally end up being about 20 or 30% over a normal auction price, like a fire sale auction where they would put up the book and you have 7 days to bid. Those are kind of the situations you want to look for when you're buying these CGC 9.8 books, because the fixed price ones are usually a little overpriced. So these 4 sellers that I'm going to share with you, they all really regularly post new CGC 9.8 books. They're having new books graded all the time, every month, so there's definitely a business going on behind the scenes with these sellers, where they're bringing in a lot of books either from collections or they're sending a lot of books to CGC, getting them graded. And this really helps as well to stay away from kind of the counterfeit and fraud that is known to happen with CGC books. If you stay with sellers that are CGCing a lot of books every month and buying a lot of collections and they have really high feedback scores on eBay, you're pretty much going to avoid most of the fraud and counterfeit online and on eBay with CGC 9.8 comics. So I have 4 of my favorite eBay sellers. I brought out 2 books too. Amazing Spider-Man 238 I purchased from one of these sellers, and this Amazing Spider-Man 252 I also purchased from one of these sellers on an auction as well, so they weren't fixed price auctions. So that's in general where you're going to find the best price. So that's why when you first get into it, it can be really hard to kind of know where to start when you're buying CGC 9.8 books. So let's get into these 4 sellers here. The first 2 I'm going to mention are really good if you live in Canada. I live in Canada. It's really hard to find decent shipping to Canada from the United States because most of these books are in the United States. So these first 2 sellers have, I think it's $15, $16 American per CGC book shipping to Canada, which is amazing. Most of the time it's 30, 40, 50, even over. A lot of times they're in the shipping eBay program where there's a lot of import charges as well. So these sellers are not into that. Basically $15, $16 US to ship to Canada from the US, which is super rock bottom cheap. And yeah, both of these sellers are really good. These 2 sellers are where I bought these 2 books from. So the first seller is Dotcom Comics, I believe it is. Oh shit, you know what? I want to double check that one because I want to see if it's comic with an S, or because I almost think it's. Just give me a second here. I'm not going to start this video over. I'm just going to look. Okay, Dotcom Comics with an S. So Dotcom Comics, it'll be in the description here. I'll have it showing up. Formerly, this eBay channel was called Sell My Comics. Now they switched it over to Dotcom Comics, I think a couple months ago. Their feedback score is 23,211, so a lot of sales. They're posting regularly CGC 9.8 books once or twice, maybe even 3 times a month. They also have a lot of raw books as well, so there's just kind of an overall really good store. And I was looking at their feedback actually. There is some negative and neutral feedback, so more so than other sellers. And personally, I've purchased maybe 4 or 5 CGC 9.8s from this seller, and they've been fantastic. Really good shipping. Again, the shipping is about $15, $16 US, which is really cheap for a US seller. So personally for me, I've had great experience with this seller. Maybe if you're buying raw books, maybe he's overgrading a little bit because, yeah, there is some neutral and negative feedback compared to some of the other sellers. But this seller is still always posting a lot of CGC 9.8 books, a lot of auctions, so they're not fixed price. They're just, auctions start at $1, and, over the course of 7 days, that's in general where you're going to get the best prices for these kind of books. So Dotcom Comics is the first one I would totally recommend. Second seller here is Elmar _ENT, and this is probably the best seller if you live in Canada and you want to buy books from the States and have them shipped over quite quickly and easily. This seller lives in Niagara Falls, United States, so they go over the border once or twice a week to ship through Canada Post. to ship your books that you would win through Canada Post. And so it's Elmar_ENT. Their feedback score is 24,998, so lots of completed sales. They have really good feedback, hardly no negative or neutral feedback. I purchased my first Hobgoblin, Amazing Spider-Man 238 from them. And yeah, if you're in Canada, this seller, they probably post CGC 9.8 books in auction form about once a month. Right now, I had a look on their site, and there's only like 15 listings. That's kind of how they work, is they'll have about 15 listings of like super expensive books, like Hulk 181. They're all CGC books, but really kind of over 5,000. They have about 15 listings, and then once a week they post about 300 listings from, you know, basically from like CGC 9.4 up to CGC 9.8. And I've purchased a lot of books from Elmar Ent. My Hulk 340, I think 2 Incredible Hulk 340s I purchased from them. So yeah, really good seller. They always have like really classic key issues from the 80s and 90s in the CGC 9.8. Certainly one to watch. I'm always like checking out, because usually once a month, again, they'll post about 300 auctions. So every month I'm always just waiting for those auctions to show up a lot of the times. Okay, so those are the 2 sellers that I would recommend if you live in Canada, and their shipping's about $15 American to ship books from the US to Canada, which is pretty much unheard of on eBay, and they're really good sellers, always posting new CGC 9.8 books that look really good, and I've had good experiences with them. So 2 more sellers here. Next one is Jbird 8325, has a feedback score of 18,909. And right now there's a lot of great CGC 9.8 books on Jbird's account. I just purchased my Batman 567, the first Batgirl, from him. And shipping to Canada is not too bad. It's, I think for my Batgirl it was like 25 to 30-ish, with like no import fees or anything, which is not too bad. That's getting into that territory where I don't really like to pay over $30 to have a book shipped. But so shipping's not too bad, and always posting new CGC 9.8 books, this account too. Certainly in the last few months as well, I've noticed. I don't know if that's kind of permanent. I haven't watched them as long as the first 2 sellers. The first 2 sellers are really like, because they have that good shipping to Canada, those are the sellers I really, really watch, and they're always posting new CGC 9.8 books. But yeah, if you're in the States, I think this Jbird account would be one to save as your sellers on eBay and keep a close eye on. And the last seller here that I purchased a couple books from, I purchased my Transformers #1 in the CBCS 9.8 from this seller. It's Comic-Warehouse. And they have a feedback score of 26,240. Really good feedback score, not a lot of negative feedback at all. Regularly posting CGC 9.8 books. They have a lot of raw books as well, so it's kind of a full store. So yeah, this is another one that they probably don't post as much as the other 3 sellers, I would say. CGC 9.8 auctions. I know they have CGC 9.8 books in the fixed price, but every now and then you get, maybe once a month, you get a group of auctions in the CGC 9.8s too at Comic Warehouse. So I think it's always one that I look at too, and every now and then you find some really nice. So those are the 4 sellers, and again, all these sellers have in common is they're always posting auction CGC 9.8s, and that's, you know, kind of where you can get a bit lost is at the beginning. The books are quite rare, you know, CGC 9.8s are pretty rare, so a lot of the times you're just going on the internet and seeing those fixed price auctions that are probably 20 to 30% more than you should be paying for the book. Whereas if you follow a couple sellers, and these sellers are always posting, you know, those fire sale auctions, and that's where you're going to get the best deal on CGC 9.8 books. So certainly keep in mind those 4 sellers. I highly recommend them. I purchased a lot of books, spent a lot of money with those sellers. Now I want to go over quickly some bidding tips and eBay best practices. And I'm certainly not an expert on eBay or anything, but I do have a lot of experience. And, you know, I found, you know, kind of a pretty basic strategy that I win most of the auctions using this basic strategy. So one thing I want to say, really, it's kind of so basic, but what you want to do, like, obviously you see a comic that you might want, you put it on your watch list. The day of, you want to set your alarm for about 10 minutes before the auction ends. You know, set your alarm on your mobile phone, and that alarm is going to go off 10 minutes before. And, you know, there's been 3 or 4 times where, you know, life happens and you get busy during the day, and then all of a sudden that alarm goes off, and I'm like, oh, yes, okay. I totally would have forgot and missed that auction if this alarm didn't go off. So first, just a good practice and a tip is to set an alarm so you don't miss like a really good auction that you could get a really good deal on. So if the seller doesn't look too reputable and doesn't have a really high feedback score, like some of the ones that I recommended here, my advice and recommendation would just be to communicate with them a lot. And then if they're not getting back to you, if they seem, you know, half-assed and not responsible, then probably just don't buy the book. But if they're communicating really good and they seem like they're really like interested in customer service and things like that, then, you know, maybe you could buy from them. That's how I sort of distinguish between, you know, if say I see a book that I really want and the feedback score is like 200, so they've only had 200 completed things, and maybe there's some negative feedback. Like those sellers, I will message them and just go, hey, like I'm considering this book, like you know, I just wanted to make sure the shipping price to Canada, and just, you know, random questions, whatever, like chit chat a bit. And if they get back to you and they seem like they're, you know, communicating and quite responsible, then, you know, you could probably pull the trigger. I would say that's the only thing you can kind of do maybe with less reputable sellers. Just communicate and kind of judge their responsibility level, I guess. So, my bidding strategy, okay, like it's quite simple how I've sort of won all these books. Obviously you want to set the alarm so you don't miss it. But what I do is I do my pricing research, which, you know, we have pricing videos every Sunday here. So I do my pricing research. I get a really sort of, I know the actual, like a competitive price for that book. And, you know, generally what I do is do a very strong bid. So, you know, for instance, say I did some pricing research and I think this book will go for $525 by just some pricing research, whatever book it is, XYZ. So in general, with about 5 seconds left, 4 to 5 seconds left, on a book like that, I would probably bid about $555 with 4 or 5 seconds left. And in general, I find that you'll probably win the auction doing that. And the only thing that's somewhat of a downside to that strategy is every now and then you might have to pay up because, you know, essentially you're putting in a really strong bid and hoping that everyone sort of bids around that, you know, that researched price of about $525. And then if you bid at $550, you're going to, you know, take that down if everyone's sort of bidding like $530, $525, $520. I find that's a lot of the times what happens. But, you know, in general, that you're going to win auctions bidding like this. But every now and then you might overpay because you are, you know, essentially bidding maybe $30 or $40 more, or, you know, 10 to 20% more than, you know, your researched price that you want to pay for the book, in hopes that you just, you know, win the auction outright. And yeah, again, you know, I found, you know, I've sort of done some, you know, trials where I would bid maybe 45 seconds before the auction ended. But then, you know, that gives people time to react. And if someone's willing to overpay, that, you know, they'll be willing to overpay and they'll have time to put in another bid and win it. So I find with about 5 or 4 seconds left, you put in a really strong bid and make sure you do your pricing research and put in a bid, you know, 10 to 20% over your pricing research. And hopefully it just goes for around that price. But, you know, I would say maybe a 10 or 20% chance that you might overpay a little bit if someone is overbidding a tad. But the main thing is you're going to win the books. And yeah, for me, a lot of the times I'm willing to pay maybe 10 or 20% more just to make sure I win that specific book at that time. Because yeah, some of these CGC 9.8, you know, they're not super rare, but they are pretty rare. You got to be really patient. And for some, you know, like a book like, you know, First Hobgoblin. Yeah, this book doesn't show up very much in an auction format, like a fire sale auction format. Doesn't show up very often. So, you know, books like this, if you do see them, probably best to bid a little bit over, and hopefully you take it down for that sort of research price. And, you know, the last thing to just say is you don't want to buy during like a hype phase or a trailer announcement or any type of announcement or show announcement. You know, like for example, couple weeks ago, a She-Hulk series was announced, and the CGC 9.8 first She-Hulks went from $350 to $550 overnight. So that would just be the last sort of general point: is don't buy like in a hype-filled environment, even if the comic book is on an auction format. You just want to buy the books that you love, the books that don't have a lot of hype going on right now. And if there is a lot of hype, you're probably just best to wait, because a lot of times you'll buy during the hype, and then a year later you'll realize you overpaid about 10 or 20%. Okay, so yeah, really happy that I could share my 4 favorite eBay sellers, because yeah, in general, I don't do too much like general eBay searches anymore. Every now and then I'll put in like CGC 9.8 and just see what's out there. I don't purchase all my books from these sellers. I still do, some general searches, but maybe once or twice a week I go to these sellers' sites and see if they've posted any CGC 9.8s. And the best thing to do is just go to the seller site, bring up their items, and then search CGC 9.8 in the item description, and then that's going to bring up like all the CGC 9.8s for that specific seller. Okay, so I think that's going to be all for this video, but if you haven't already, please join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8 here. And when you press subscribe, the little bell pops up, so hit the bell, you get all our latest notifications as well. I'm also really active on Instagram and Twitter, so follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm posting pictures of all my CGC 9.8 comics and kind of reminders of all my videos as well. That'd be so much appreciated though if you could. But thank you very much for watching the video today, and I'll see you on the next one.